Let me continue with what Father Kevin was talking about yesterday when he spoke about how St. Ignatius, once he decided that he was going to go to school and began to study, how he would often find himself so caught up in spiritual things that he couldn't really focus on his studies. And what's beautiful about that is when St. Ignatius discovered that, he reached a very profound and helpful realization for all of us, which is that the way that we feel towards God and even the insights that we receive, perhaps about God, have to be ordered to what the will of God is in our lives. And he had decided, and it had taken him a while, but he decided that God wanted him to help souls. He decided that he needed to get an education in order to do that. And these spiritual experiences were getting in the way of that education. And so the purpose that God had led him, the will of God, seemed to him far more important than whatever these particularly extremely pleasant and on the surface very spiritual feelings were leading him. And so he then decided to go to the professor and say, I'm not going to dabble in these experiences. I'm going to set myself to work at learning. Years later, he would talk about how people who prayed for a long time, and he would say something like 95%, perhaps more, deceive themselves. In other words, he was far more concerned that someone had a concept of what God willed for them and stayed with that and prepared themselves in ways of giving up and mortifying themselves in order to stay focused on what the will of God was. And he found it a little suspicious if somebody said, the will of God for me is that I pray for long hours. Perhaps that person did have a vocation, to be a hermit or to a monastery. But if you were a Jesuit and you thought that the Lord was calling you to pray for long hours, at the cost of the service of others, Ignatius had no sympathy for that. No, mortify yourself, even of your desire to pray, so that you might serve your brothers. Prepare yourself to serve your brothers. Make yourself available to serve the women and the men around you. It was a wisdom that St. Ignatius learned early in his spiritual life, and it's one he carried forward throughout his life. And that's the wisdom we find in the Autobiography of St. Ignatius for today.